Yes. Yes.
And it's
Sure.
17.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Mystic Chat. And today we are talking about magical names and identities. My name is Chris Allaun, and if you haven't seen this show, and if you haven't, go back and look at all the old ones. There's about 17 of them. My name is Chris Allaun. I am a published author and a pagan priest and a teacher. And I would like to introduce Luke. Luke, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. My name is Luke. I am a devotional polytheist. I'm a member of the Troth. So I work a lot with the Norse and the Hellenic deities. I'm also a author. You can find my column monthly at The Wild Hunt. And I'm sure we'll talk more about me later. I use the pronouns they, them. And I'd like to introduce my friend Ruby.
Thank you. I am Ruby Ruse, and if you've been a participant in the show before, you may be confused because people do use either Ruby Ruse or sometimes they call me Amy, and that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. I am a YouTube artist. You can find my channel Fairy Fortunes on YouTube. I'm also active on Facebook and Instagram. And I talk about the modern fairy faith and folklore and all kinds of fun and exciting things on my channel. So I do hope you'll follow me there. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our fourth panelist, Laura. Laura, can you tell us about your doings and beings?
Hi, my name is Laura Gonzalez. I am a priestess of the goddess. I am a very active podcaster. I have 2 podcasts on CSMP, The Circle Sanctuary Network podcast. I do Lunatic Mondays, Lunes Lunáticos, a bilingual one. And I also produce and conduct once in a while Paganos del Mundo, which is the second bilingual one, but this one in English and Spanish and Portuguese. And I do, I'm a witch for hire. I do tarot readings, and I am also part of this video blog. And we are so happy to talk about names and identities today. So without further ado, Chris Allaun, take us home, honey.
So today we're going to talk about names and identities and what that means. And for this show, we thought the perfect person to talk about this would, of course, would be our very own Ruby Ruse, who, like she said, sometimes goes by Amy. And so, why do we even have magical names? What does it mean? Who are we? And what's happening?
Well, names can be a very powerful thing. They are a mode of branding. Like even people that don't distinguish between a mundane name and a magical name, our names have power because they identify us and in many cases are our brand. Especially in this day and age of social media, that's how people find us on Instagram, on Facebook, how they connect with us. If we're applying to a job, our name is our primary calling card. So names have a lot of power, and within the magical community, a percentage of people do take on a magical name. And actually in the year 2018, very recently, I adopted permanently a magical name for myself, which I had been using in other circles. And in a pagan ritual that I was attending with Chris Allaun, as a matter of fact, I came to realize that the name Ruby Ruse was in fact my magical name. And where that came from is actually Ruby Ruse was a fairy persona that I had adopted as a performer. And what I discovered is that I was my most authentic self in what I thought was a character performance. But in that mode of fairy persona, people came to me and were asking me questions about modern fairy faith spirituality. They were asking me about magic. They were asking me about working with fairy spirits, which is something that I did, but I did not really communicate in my fairy persona. But it was as if it just was a part of, well, it was a part of my authentic self, which was resonating in this idea that I had that was a fairy persona. And then, as I said, in this magical ritual that we were doing, is that it dawned on me that this authentic self, this happy, free, magical being was, in fact, who I really was. And so I permanently adopted the name Ruby Ruse and started my YouTube channel and my Fairy Fortunes business. And the rest is history. And many of my, like Chris often calls me Amy, because that's how I met. And what's unusual is that I actually first knew you as Corey, because everyone, all of our mutual friends referred to you as a magical name of Coriander, which was shortened to Corey. And so I was like, who's Chris? Because all I knew was the name Corey. So, but I think where the idea of magical names comes from is a true version of ourselves. I think magic is not something separate from ourselves. Magic is very much a part of humanity. And so a person that chooses to work within magic really has to allow their authentic self to showcase through. And I think that that might be a reason why some people take magical names. But I was talking about Coriander, and I very rarely hear you refer to yourself in that way now. Do you expound on that a little bit, Chris?
So, okay, so a couple things I want to touch on, and how I was trained a long time ago was that what I was told was that a lot of people who became pagan in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even the 80s and 90s, they wanted to distinguish themselves between, like, for example, Chris and Coriander, or Chris and Chevelle. I have another name, Chevelle, as well, because partly is, I think, well, how I was trained, I don't know how true this is what I was told, is because they didn't want anyone else to know, like in the professional life or their social circles, like in the suburbs or something, that, they were indeed a pagan or a witch or whatever. And so another person told me it had to do something with the witch hunts. I'm not sure how true that is. I don't think that's actually very true. I think it's a no witch's tale. I like the idea of coming into your own magical being, because there's something called the magical personality. It's meaning, who are you when you're connected to your gods and connected to your ancestors and connected to the earth and the sky. Who are you? You're your magical person. And for Coriander, so I got the name. It's so funny because before I became ordained, the last minute, and it was the year 2002, and it was a long year and a half, let me tell you. It was the year that 9/11 happened. Another magical student who was my magical practice partner, he passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack, and then my father died that year, and a good friend of mine had some tragedies. It was just a year of crap. And so the night before we were going to PSG, actually, the Pagan Spirit Gathering, for my ordination, it was 2002, they were like, yeah, you need to pick a magical name, like literally the night before you left. And I'm like, what? he was like, hey, yeah. And in our tradition, is what we do. He was just like, we haven't talked about it because there was so much going on. We had to plan funerals and fly across the country a few times, like all these things. It just, of all the things we have to deal with, that wasn't priority. And I was like, okay, how do I pick a magical name? So we picked an herb book and goes, I'll just pick out this book. And I'm like, coriander, very fiery, brings healing. It's good for love and things like that. I'm like, coriander sounds good. But then I got shortened to Corey because people kept saying, you don't look like a Chris, you look like a Corey. And at this time, I'm 27. And then as and this was 2002 and 2015, I don't remember. So I think in 2015, my Native American teacher, Billy Tapatote, was just like, okay, so now that you have 8 years of training under me, you can do sweat watches, you can do pipe ceremonies. It's time to give you a magical Native name. And so she goes, oh, I'm going to call you Shaveo, which means a warrior who walks in spirit. And that is very much me, because I am a warrior in spirit. So that's how that happened, and that's how that changed. And the interesting thing is about identity, I think your magical names can change because your identity of who you are magically and spiritually and emotionally changes,
So I've got sort of a question here.
Yeah.
Because like my introduction to the idea of magical names was actually, Amy, it was actually through reading fairy tales. And the idea of like, don't give spirits your name, give them a fake name, give them something, because if they get your actual name, they have power over you. So have a different name, have a name that you give people that is not your full actual name as a protective measure, right? But it sounds like you guys are really talking about magical names as like something that reflects who you are more accurately than your birth name does. So I was sort of wondering, like, do you have magical uses for like fake names that sort of distance things, or is it much more about like being able to like step into your own identity a little bit more strongly?
Well, I just made a video on this, actually. I don't advocate for giving fake names, particularly to fairy spirits, because fairies are powerful supernatural beings, and they will largely know if you are lying to them. And the reason that I think, and this is just my personal opinion on the issue, the reason that I think that fairy spirits frown on lying is that it takes away your power. It weakens you. And so you are diminished in their eyes when you lie. But everybody has so many names. That's the thing, is many names are authentic. Ruby Ruse is what I prefer to be called, but Amy is just as valid. And many people call me Amy, and I allow them to do that. The other thing is that many times we go by our last names. In my video, I talked about how there are appropriate contexts for names. So I'm not going to go to my son's parent-teacher conference and introduce myself as Ruby Ruse. Well, that is my truth. That's not necessarily going to be helpful to my son's teacher. And it doesn't establish the correct relationship, because we're not trying to establish a correct relationship. I mean, to establish an intimate relationship, we're trying to establish a professional one. So I'm going to call my son's teacher by their last name, and they're going to call me by my last name. because it sets context and it sets a boundary. No, but I think where we get into trouble is if someone introduces themselves, like in my case, if I introduce myself as Ruby Ruse, I'm expecting people to call me Ruby Ruse. But a lot of times they will neglect that I introduce myself as Ruby Ruse, and they will call me by some other kind of name that they've heard somewhere else. And we do that even in a non-magic context. Like one of my dearest friends, her name is Danielle, and it is 100% Danielle. Her name is not Danny. Her name is not Danny. And to call her that is once again to rip away her power. Anytime that someone purposely calls her Danny, they are purposely trying to diminish her power. So I think that all names have magical powers in that they delineate boundaries, and they are a source of information, they are a source of power, and they have this amazing ability to establish connection, relationships, and boundaries.
That's awesome. I love that explanation.
See,
Wow.
that's why I got so inspired by her video and suggested that today we talk about names. And to give my 2 cents, as you can see on the screen, I have changed my name to Citlali. What is that, Laura? Why you put Citlali there? There's a pronunciation, Citlali. That's how you pronounce it, Citlali.
It's beautiful.
And Citlali means the luminous one.
Mm.
So it's closer to Lucifer than it is to anything else. Or
I love it. I love it.
what is the other morning star? Venus, right? So Citlali is the bringer of light, or the light bearer, if you will. And it's funny. I mean, I have so many things to say, so I'm going to try to resume. In the pagan community, I mean, I never shy away from saying I'm a witch for hire. I always do the little shtick, the joke, whatever. If I were to name myself Citlali, ka-ching, 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 my bank will be flowing over. And I don't find me, Laura, I don't find that ethical, because even though this is the magical name that my people, through the day that I was born and the time that I was born and the qualities and characteristics of my horoscope, to call it something practical, it's called Tonalpawali, but that's a completely different conversation. The name will be Citlali. And if I were to say, yeah, oh yeah, I'm this magical bruja and my name is Citlali, and then give me your money, and you know, it's so unethical. So I change it right now just to kind of make a point, because I'm very comfortable with Laura Gonzalez, and my actual name is Laura Sofia Gonzalez Herrera, but that sounds like a month-long thing. So I reduce it and Americanize it, or United States-ize it into Laura Gonzalez, because that's what I feel comfortable with. But my middle name is Sophia, and so I have never feel called to change the magical name or go for the magical name or whatever. However, like Chris and many other folk who do magic, I did receive a magical name in a ceremony. And I was very, very amazingly blessed to receive the name in English and then in Nahuatl, which is the Aztec language. And I was confused at the beginning because I thought I had received shoe and apple. And when I look in the Nahuatl dictionary, it was shoe and shoe. So I was like, oh, it was the exact same name, but in English and Nahuatl. So it's beautiful. And as you can see, I'm not saying that name because that's not a public name, that is a private name. So where does the power of the name lies? And why it's important at certain times to have a legal name? And this is a really a quick anecdote that I was telling y'all, the panel, before we started the show. In the Latin American community, the pagan community, we had this character that used to go by the name of La Bruja Verde, the Green Witch. And this Green Witch was very knowledgeable. She was sharing articles and she was writing on e-zines and she was doing audios and etc. And there was then this big controversy of who is she and is she even a girl and where does she live? And so it was like when the first times of doxing people was happening and they were trying to dox her and all of that. And she decided to disappear. And then nobody knew who she was. So ethically, we had this teacher that was teaching and doing conferences and this and that, and then suddenly disappear. And we don't know who this person is. So we're going back to accountability and responsibility as a leader. And every time I say a leader, I can hear Luke saying, so what makes a leader? And I think that, you know, the very act of fulfilling a need for the community, which she was doing, but then it was very unethical because she just disappeared. So she could probably open a new account on Facebook and name herself Juanita Martinez, and we don't know that that's her. And it's just, to me, it's a little yucky.
I think you have a great point there because in that regard, there's accountability.
Yeah.
You know, and here's the thing though too, on the flip side, I have several female friends who on Facebook, they have to friend you because they don't even use anything close to their name because they've had issues with predators or ex-husbands or stalkers or whatever. And because it was weird because this shows my male privilege, but I was like, why do they? I don't understand. Why do you change your name on Facebook? And when it was explained to me, I was like, oh my God, it was definitely a safety issue, absolutely. But on the other hand, with Laura's story about it's hard to hold someone accountable, whatever. And I don't know, maybe she was good, maybe she wasn't so good. I don't know, but we all know pagan leaders, authors, whatever, who haven't always been so nice. And so I'm not saying, I don't believe in the whole idea of you have a slip up, you say something out of turn, that your career is over. I do believe in holding someone accountable. I know we had Gay Day on this show before, and he was very graceful. If it's someone you know, you private message them and say, hey, what did you mean when you said that? Let's unpack that. I do like that. However, sometimes if it's habitual, we need to hold people accountable. I'm like, hey, you can't do that. And so they just ghost and they have a whole new persona, and it's hard to would do that. However, I wonder, and I don't know, I wonder if that was intentional. If that person, the Green Witch, intentionally did that so they could say whatever and then disappear.
Just very quickly, what I know is that they were a mom, and they were in a place in South America where paganism is not that as open as it is here in the United States. So first of all, being a mom, period, you need to take care of your child, period. Right. The problem ensued because she wanted to be published in our magazine, and we were like, okay, we're going to publish you, but we need to know who you are. Mm-hmm. We need to know where you live. We need to know how you look like. We need to know who you are. We're not going to publish you in the magazine without knowing who you are or what you look like. Like, it's just so disingenuous that in this day and age, you want to be on. So mind you, put yourself in the mind frame of, for the pagan, Spanish-speaking pagan community, the majority of the communication and the information is virtual. We don't have the opportunity like in the United States to get gatherings and stores and people know each other in person. We live our paganism very much online. especially 10 years ago. Now it's getting a little lighter, but so we were like, okay, we want to publish you. We want your article, but who are you? And, you know, that started being problematic for us. Because otherwise, you know, you tell me who you are. You tell me what you look like. I'm the editor. Cool. I know where to find you. I know who you are. But I'm not going to publish you without knowing who am I publishing, you know.
Well, and I think that there's like I hear a couple of different things that are going on here, right? Like I also think that, like, especially if this person was dealing with the threat of being doxxed, like if I was dealing with the threat of being doxxed, like I would also maybe disappear forever from the internet. Like that's a real livelihood and life threatening situation sometimes, right?
Yep.
But I think that we're also dealing here with questions. I think a lot of what we're dealing here with is with questions of accountability and questions of almost, I mean, for me, being heathen, right? It's a question of your reputation, right? How do you build your reputation? How do people know who you are? And like, your reputation can be good or bad, but it is yours and it's linked to something.
Mm-hmm.
It's linked to the way people know you. And sort of as you were talking about, Ruby, talking about branding and names being branding,
Mm-hmm.
it's, I mean, it's a very online sort of way to think about it, but I don't think it's wrong. I think that as we move through our lives, sometimes we rebrand. Sometimes we are given identities that don't fit. Sometimes we decide which of our many identities to use when interacting in a specific place or a specific way, right? And like, depending on how your depending on how your magic works, or how you think about magical names specifically, that adds a whole nother level of like what, like, I think it's also about like, who do I want to be right now, and which of my reputations do I want to bring with me to tie to this act.
And if I may jump real quickly here, that's part of the branding, right? It's part of the, like with me, if I were to use Itlali, which is a name that I deserve, was given to me, resonates with me, I love it because, you know, it's the light and all of that. It is, in my case, you know, it could be fetishized, it could be exoticized and tokenized. So I'm like, no, I'd rather stay with Laura. And even though staying with Laura, I have had people, I seriously have had people, how do you pronounce your name? Laura, sound it out. I mean, it's Laura, like,
funny.
you know. But identity, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ruby.
I really identified with what Luke was saying. I think that's a large reason why I adopted the name Ruby Ruse in a magical context, is because of that dissonance of identity. The name that I was born with, Amy Christensen, ooh, I just released my name. That person has a very, very specific role in the mundane world. And that person is not really who I am. And what I found is when I was at these festivals, being Ruby Ruse, and then had that realization that people saw the real me. They saw that I was this I was practicing the fairy faith. They saw that, and I wasn't even communicating that at the time. But yet people were like, I know that you know things about this, and I really want you to answer these questions for me. And I was happy. And that's the thing, is that I don't associate Amy Alice necessarily as a happy person. But Ruby Ruse, who I really identify as my authentic self, is not just happy, she's joyful. And so that was what, when Luke was speaking, I really feel like, yes, names bring with them sometimes a past identity that may or may not be present for you.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and jump on in right there because that's a perfect segue. So like, uh, right, like as a trans person, I have chosen names. I have done the incredibly legal and incredibly unfun process of changing my name legally, right? And that means that like I spent a lot of time thinking about that, about like names that are tied to identities that no longer fit you or no longer serve you, names that you have never identified with,
Yeah.
but you were given, and like what responsibility you have to the givers and what responsibility you have to yourself. Um, and I've thought a lot about, because as I was choosing my name, right, like the the lore that I grew up with is that like magical practitioners have true names, right? And depending on which version you're dealing with, what that true name is going to be different, right? So for some people, it is the name that your parents gave you in its entirety, right? For some people, it is the name that you are given after like some kind of arduous process, like becoming an ordained, for example, right? That would be your true name now. That's the name you earned. Um, for some people, it is some like sort of like quasi spiritual name that you discover inside yourself that maybe you never tell anybody else. Um, but like as I was sort of thinking about like changing my name and like true names and what names meant, I did a lot of thinking about like, so which of these names is important? And like, especially if I give myself a name, if I like, and I agree, names are super powerful. I will even go so far as to say that names shape you in as much as you shape them. Um, uh, as you choose a name, I did a lot of thinking about like what energies do I want to like invoke there? How much of my like family do I want to bring into it? How much of it is going to like set me on this new path? Um, and a thing I love about the trans community is that we have such a plethora of names, and like everything is up for grabs as a name, right? I was joking with a friend of mine recently. Uh, I have friends who amongst them could populate a small forest ecosystem. So I know a rabbit, a sequoia, like a lot of like
That's awesome.
names of place, right? And I think that it's really the same sort of question when we're talking about magic. I think it's exactly the same question when we're talking about magic, honestly. It's both like, what sort of energy do I have that I want to bring? And like, who am I really? Right? Who gets to know that?
Mm.
Um, and I think that there is something to say about like, if you have a name that is, like I very seldom say my full name at this point. Luke is not it. Luke is a shortening. Um, because I do find a certain amount of power in being able to give an accurate name that is not a lie, but is not the entire truth either.
That's cool.
Yeah, I
Right.
like that.
And to be able to choose who knows me best.
Mm.
Mhm.
That's fascinating.
It
Um,
is.
so I want to talk about really quickly about the idea of a magical personality. And from my understanding, that kind of comes from ceremonial magic, because the idea is that your magical name or your identity or your role or your title is kind of like an invocation. You're invoking that identity. For example, when I'm Cheveo, Cheveo is very different um, than Chris Allen. Chris Allen is magical, but when Cheveo comes out, he's bringing in some drums, some rattles. He's gonna probably um, do some journeying and things like that. When Chris Allen comes out, he's probably going to talk to you about the goddess. And it's just a little bit different. So the interesting thing is I've noticed for a magical personality, it's a state of consciousness that is connected to energy and magic that you create as a magical identity. So um, for example, here's a great one. If I feel like I'm being psychically attacked, and Chris goes, "Oh my God, what the hell? I try to be a good person." Anxiety, right? Like, what's happening? What's happening? I'm gonna put on Cheveo. It's like I turn into Superman. I'm like Cheveo, and I just think about it, and I bring in that consciousness. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna get. I'm ready to go. Here I come. I'm gonna get you. You're gonna curse me. So it's a whole different mindset. It's that whole very much. And I'm a comic book guy. I'm sorry, I just am. Clark Kent and Superman. Clark Kent, the bumbling news reporter who messes up, versus Superman who saves the day. And it's very much of what you need to do. And I know we have some parents on right now, and I don't know because I am not a parent, but I'm guessing when you're yourself and just hanging out with your friends, you're not the same as my kid's in trouble. I'm a parent. I'm gonna go kick someone's ass. It's this whole personality change, but each of those things are us.
Yeah.
For example,
Absolutely.
I would never will go into my massage session as a massage therapist and goes, "Hello, I'm Reverend Chris Allen." They'd be like, "So?"
Yeah.
I just wouldn't do that. On the other hand, I'm interning at the hospital right now as a chaplain, and I would absolutely do that. But on the other hand, I wouldn't say, "Hi, I'm Cheveo." They'd say, "Oh, what country are you from?" Because it sounds foreign. They wouldn't understand what that means. So it's also kind of, for me, what energies or people I'm trying to help them understand who I am.
I totally agree with that, and I have, of course, I have an anecdote for you guys, because I always do. I'm full of them. Very, very, very early in my public working with the pagan community about 10 years ago in Chicago, I was talking to somebody who will not be named. And I was telling this person, witch and bruja are exactly the same word. It's just bruja in Spanish and witch in English. So brujeria is witchcraft, because people have this idea, unfortunately, that brujeria is like a specific tradition that is very close and similar to like the Afro diaspora traditions, which is not true. And then Mexican witchcraft is something completely different. So I was telling this person, brujeria witch and bruja is the same word. And she looked at me and sized me up and went on this little rant of, "I'm not a bruja. Please don't call me bruja. I will never accept that bruja and witch is the same." And I'm like, "Okay, lady, I touch a nerve, I guess." It was such a reaction that she inspired me to put the word bruja on my website. And to this day, my domain is Bruja Laura Gonzalez. Because there is such a strength, there is such a power, like you were saying, Chris, like, "Oh, really? You think that, oh, don't call me Bruja because blah, blah." I'm like, you don't know what you're saying, because nothing. Yeah, I'm a priestess. Yeah, I'm a podcaster. Yes, I'm an educator. Yes, I'm an author. Yes, I do this and that. The one that I like to wear on my sleeve is bruja, you know, and it gives you that power, you know, and it's not necessarily that it's a particular name or I'm the only bruja in the world, but if it doesn't empower you, why do it? You know, and it's what Luke was saying, you know, you get to play with your identity and your names. And again, in the Latino community, there is this custom, horrible for me, to call everybody mama. Hi mama, how are you mama? How you doing mom? I'm not a mother. I never birthed anybody. And I have to continually tell people like, don't call me mom. I'm not your mom. I'm not your mama. I'm not a mommy. I'm not a mamita. So don't call me that. And it's just horrible because oh, it's a term of endearment to you. It's not to me. My name is Laura. So call me Laura, call me Bruja, call me Blue Witch, call me bitch, call me whatever you want, but no, don't call me bitch. But don't call me mama, you know, because it's like, why? So it has a lot of, again, that's why I was so inspired by Ruby, because it gives a lot of power to stop a person and be like, no, my name is not mama, I'm Bruja, you know, call me Blue Witch.
Yes, and I agree. I think that there is more power in giving someone your name and establishing that control and that boundary and that level of connection with that person than trying to give them an identity that does not resonate with you. I mean, my legal name is Amy, but actually it does not hold any power for me because no one really of note calls me that, really. And so when someone calls me Ruby, it's not so much that they have control over me, but I know they're talking to me and they're trying to establish a connection with me. Whereas if they call me Amy, I may not understand that there's a connection between this and they're trying to communicate with me. So I do think that there is more power in establishing that level of boundary and like you said, Laura, correcting people on giving them, this is who I am. I am not, you say, I am telling you my name and this is the truth.
And I also think that that allows you to like demand respect, right? So again, I speak only for myself, because the trans community is a wild and woolly wonderland of many different kinds of people, all of whom will disagree with me on something, and often many things. So, but in my experience of trans community, there's this concept called the dead name, right?
Yeah.
And it's the name that like often it's the birth name, the name that your parents gave you, that you no longer use, and that for a lot of people, use of it is violent. It's like it's actually hurtful or harmful, right? And I kind of hear that in what you're talking about too, Laura, to a certain degree, of like people deciding what to call you, even when it is incorrect, and even when you correct them, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there's part of it in being able to be like, here's who I am, here's who I want you to interact with me as, right? And the next step there is almost a level of enforcement. And I know that there are some people who have like names that don't track as like standard European American names, right? Who have this same problem of like somebody tries to shorten it, somebody tries to mispronounce it, somebody tries to make it more palatable, rather than actually respecting them and learning who they are, right? And I think that that has a lot of magical resonance too, right? Because like if we're talking about psychic attacks, right? Let's talk about like attacks to the identity. Let's talk about saying, actually, no, you don't know who you are. I know better than you do.
Mhm.
Um, mhm.
It's gone to the and please, I would like to borrow your disclaimer, look. Please, to the trans community, I know I'm probably saying something that is gonna hurt you. I hope it never hurts you. But the person that kept calling me mommy is a very conscious person of respecting people's pronouns.
Mm.
So when this person keep calling me mommy, at one point I turn around and I say to them, think about it as if it was my pronoun. And mommy is not my pronoun. And that finally clicked on their head, you know? And it's like, but the point is, why do I have to go to that extreme for you to respect the fact that I am not a mom and I don't want to be called that? My name is Laura. You
Yeah.
know, like,
It's a
come
question
on.
of respecting identity. I really do think it is.
Yes.
And whatever that identity is, right? It's a question of believing people when they tell you who they are and interacting with them like that. And I think that that's what you're talking about, Ruby, is being able to be like the first step. And I think the step with the spirits often is just to be like, here is who I am in relationship to you. Here is who I want to be, right? Like, here's how I want us to be in relationship together. The next step, which I think the spirits are sometimes much better at than people, is them being like, yeah, okay, I see the truth in that. I will interact with you there. As opposed to being like, I'm pretty sure I know better than you,
Yeah.
for some reason.
Here's an interesting thing, though. I just as you were talking, Luke, I had this memory of interacting with a spirit who was exceptionally powerful. We're talking about a spirit of fate itself. And this spirit asked me to name her.
Mm,
I had to establish the type of relationship that I had with her by giving her a name.
That's really cool. That's
Yeah, and
really neat.
I panicked and I gave her a name. And she said, why that? And I had to honestly confess that it was the first thing that popped into my head. And she accepted it as truth, because if I had not spoken the truth, she would have known and she would have been angry. But
and I,
sometimes spirits ask us to name them. And I think that is something that happens with the gods. Like a lot of times gods go by God, Lady, Lord,
Well,
because
absolutely.
that
and,
we give them.
and I
So,
You're
love
my,
that too. Like, Laura, can I go? Can I go? I'll give
yeah,
it to you
please,
right
please.
after. So I mean, and I think that's really beautiful too, in that, like, one, the act of naming somebody else on purpose is such an act of intimacy.
Mhm.
Like, I have names that I call my partners that are just between me and them, that I have given them because, like, that is the relationship that we have, right? And we can co-create names, or it can be like a nickname. Like, that's an act of intimacy. And I'm also thinking a lot about, like, in actually both of the pantheons that I work with, there's, in Norse we call it by names. There's other names that we call the gods that sort of talk about different aspects of them, like who they are when they're doing this, right? And in invocation, it's really useful to, like, pull on those by names, because you are, like, you're talking about all of the different ways that people have talked about them, kind of like you're dialing the phone number really specifically.
Right, right. In the Kabbalistic magical system, it's the same thing, because if you, for those of you who don't know the spheres or the planes of existence, it's like each of those things. Like, so, for example, the energy of aggression is called one thing in Hebrew, but that's an aspect of the divine, and then the earth plane is called something else, but that's another aspect of the divine. So it sounds very similar to that, but you're exactly what you said. You're tuning into a very specific energy. Like if I were to say, hey, yay, then that would mean something different than Odonai, you know. In fact, it would be the opposite thing.
Mhm. What Amy was sharing about naming the spirit reminded me of something we'd learned with Phyllis Corral when she was here in Chicago last year sometime, talking about nature's secrets. And part of the exercise that we did with Phyllis that day was to go into nature and talk to the tree, but not naming the tree, but rather sitting in front of it and ask it, who are you? What is your identity? What do you do? And then she was saying to us, be open to, I'm a water bearer. I am a house of the squirrel. So to allow the tree to give you its name in function to what it does or how the tree identifies itself. And not just the tree, you know, flower, the river, the stream, whatever. And believe it or not, I mean, and if you're listening to this and you're watching the Mystic Chat, I guess you will believe, I, the spider phobic and bug phobic person, sit in front of a willow, because we call it willow tree, and I asked it, what are you? Who are you? And a huge spider came around the bark of the tree, and the tree went like, I'm the house of this spider. And I'm like, okay. And then I asked, can I hug you? And then another spider came on the other side, and the tree was like, do you wanna? And I'm like, no.
That was so
Let's
funny.
respect each other, and thank you for answering, you know. But it is the power of naming ourselves, and also the power of listening to others' names. And it doesn't have to be human.
Mm.
And if you work with the spirit realm or the spirits of nature, what are their names? And I'm so glad that you remind me of that, Amy, because I think it's a wonderful practice to ask nature, okay, I know I call you Tulip, but what is your name? You know,
That is
what
awesome,
is your
Laura.
specific name, or tell me who you are. Credit to Phyllis Corrupt, because this is not me.
I
You
know,
know,
but still,
but
it's awesome. I love it.
yeah,
Oh my
yeah, I
God.
love it too. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I like about this whole concept, what we're talking about the different identities, the different facets, is that we are looking deeper into that energy. So if it's a person's identity, if it's just like you said, the tree's name, whatever it wants to be called, we're we're taking our heart energy and saying, hey, I want to know you on whatever level, you know. Like, for example, I think we can also pick how we want a relationship to be. Like, for example, if I just meet someone at a party. What's a party? I don't remember those. I remember quarantine. But anyway, sometimes I just say Chris. Oh, okay. And I don't give him my last name. I don't give him any titles, any degrees, anything. And not because I'm hiding, but I know I'll probably never see that person again, and I'm not going to invest. However, if I see them again and again and again, I'm like, Chris, what's your last name? Oh, it's Allaun, you know. So it's also your, you know, I forget who was just talking about that, Luke. I think we're all talking about that. When they call you something different and showing a lack of respect, to me, that's showing how they want to invest in you. When they do that, that's a sure sign they do not want to invest with you. Um, in you. And I'm the type of person, I don't care. I'm those people, I'd rather have a quality friends and quantity. And I think I do have some quality friends. Like, each of them are very spiritual, they're well-meaning, blah 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 blah. I don't need all that, and I'm fine with it. You know. Um, cool. So what else? since we're coming up on our last couple minutes.
Watch and follow us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, follow each one of us on our particular endeavors, and hire us for readings, hire us for work, please, and know that you are loved.
And I think
That
for
was
me, right, just to put a little stinger on the end here, if you're listening to this and you're like, but what's my magical name? Why don't I have a magical name? Everybody else has a magical name. I don't. For instance, I have my name. I find a lot of power in it. I don't think that, like all things magical, right? I don't think that you should do. I don't think you should take anything as gospel. I think you should do the things that actually make sense and like give you power and make you feel like you are interacting with people in the way that you want, whether those people be physical or not.
So
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say for myself, Shibeo was given to me. Coriander I picked for myself at the last minute, truth be told. But I do have a different magical name that's between me and the gods, you know, and not because of any like, oh, it's secret, mystical. Ooh, it's not anything like that. It just came up in a journey, and it doesn't feel correct to share it. Like if someone really goes, Chris, I really need to know, I share it. It's not a big deal. It just, that's something that just falls off the tongue. That being said, if someone really wants to find their magical name, I personally, me being me, I would do a few things. I would speak with my teachers if you have them. If you don't, journey with your gods, with things like that. And sometimes you'll see a name in mythology or even a history book and think that's a really cool name. There you go. It doesn't have to be some epiphany, the lightning strikes and that is your name. I mean, if that happens, cool. But if it doesn't, and it's just I saw it in a book, that's fine too, you know. All
Yeah,
right, guys. Well, oh, I'm sorry. And I think
my magical name came from performing as a fairy. So it can come from unexpected places. It just has to be truth.
I think you should write a book that's called Unexpected Places. That's very fairy to me, right? All right, everyone. I guess that's our cue to say goodbye. Thank you for joining us. And just like Laura said, subscribe to the channel and play us on iTunes and Spotify and all those things. Tell your friends, share this to whoever you like, because I'm sure all the groups I belong to are really getting tired of me sharing stuff. All right, everyone, have a good evening, and we shall talk soon.